What would you do if your child walked into school every day wearing the same shirt? Not by choice, but because that was all they had? Would anyone notice? Would anyone care? Elijah didn't ask for pity. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't cry out for help. All he did was quietly survive. Until one day, his silence spoke louder than anything the school had ever heard. This is the story of a boy they laughed at, until the truth made them all cry. The morning chill had just started to settle over the small town of Glenwood, Virginia. The wind tugged gently at the edges of Elijah's already fraying collar as he walked slowly through the front gates of Roosevelt Middle School. He kept his head down, fingers gripping the worn strap of his backpack as though it could shield him from the eyes he knew were watching. His shirt, an old button-down uniform top, once bright white but now a dull, uneven gray, clung to his thin frame, rumpled and threadbare, the fabric soft from too many washes. The school's fluorescent lights seemed to mock the discoloration in the early morning haze. Elijah had worn that same shirt nearly every day for months. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that there was no other option. A voice sliced through the air from the benches near the gym. "Yo, Elijah. That shirt get any sleep last night, or was it out working like your mama?" Laughter erupted, sharp, thoughtless, mean. Tyler, the biggest kid in 7th grade, leaned back with a smug grin on his face, flanked by two others who didn't dare not laugh. Elijah didn't look at them. He didn't respond. He simply walked. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like he always did. Like if he kept moving, maybe the day would pass without getting worse. His backpack jostled as he walked, one of the zippers broken and safety pinned together. The notebook inside was water-stained. He had spilled something on it last week, but he hadn't told anyone. He slid into his seat near the back of room 207 and opened his textbook, eyes low. The classroom buzzed with quiet chatter. No one sat next to him. He was used to that. It had been this way since September. The kids had noticed the faded shirt the second week of school. Tyler had made sure of that. From then on, Elijah was the stinky kid, the poor kid, the charity case, even though no one had ever given him anything. The classroom door opened. Miss Haynes, the new English teacher, walked in with a warm smile and a large thermos in her hand. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with an energy that hadn't yet been worn down by the system. She paused at the front of the room and scanned the students. Her gaze lingered briefly on Elijah. Not in pity. Not in judgment. Just recognition. "Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about dreams," she began, her voice bright and clear. "Not the ones you have while you sleep, but the ones you carry in your heart. What do you want to be? What does your future look like to you?" Elijah kept his eyes on his desk. "Write a short paragraph. We'll take turns reading them out loud." The class groaned, as middle schoolers do, but eventually, pencils scratched against paper. Elijah stared at his page for a long time. Then, slowly, in the neat block letters he'd learned from his father, he wrote, "I want to take care of my mom. I want her to feel safe and warm. I want her not to worry anymore." When Miss Haynes called his name, Elijah shook his head slightly, refusing. "No thank you," he whispered. Miss Haynes gave him a soft nod. "That's okay, Elijah. When you're ready." No one else noticed that exchange. But she did. That afternoon, the wind picked up again as Elijah rode his rusted bike home. The chain skipped once on the hill, and he had to walk it the rest of the way. His house sat on the far side of town, just beyond the old train tracks, near a cluster of single-wide trailers and cracked sidewalks. It wasn't much more than a glorified shed, really, about 600 square feet, 2 rooms, sagging porch. But it was home. It was what they had left. He propped his bike against the broken porch rail and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of vapor rub and old wood. His mother lay curled on the worn-down couch, wrapped in a blanket with patches where the threads had come undone. Her breathing was raspy, uneven. The oxygen machine they had borrowed from the clinic last week let out a low hum in the corner. "Hey, Mama," Elijah said softly. She smiled when she saw him, her eyes tired but still full of warmth. "Hey, baby. How was school today?" "Good," he lied. "We wrote about our dreams." "I wrote about you." She chuckled, a small cough following. "You're my dream, Eli." He set his backpack down gently, then walked to the tiny kitchen, which consisted of a hot plate, a toaster oven, and a mini fridge. He opened it and pulled out the last of the soup from the night before. It wasn't much, just some chicken broth with rice, but it would do. As it heated on the stove, Elijah took off his shirt, placed it carefully in the bathroom sink, and filled it with lukewarm water and dish soap. He scrubbed it by hand. It was all they had. He couldn't risk putting it in a machine anyway, it might fall apart. After wringing it out, he hung it by the old wall heater. It would dry by morning. Hopefully. Later that night, as his mother dozed off on the couch, Elijah sat at the small table by the window with his math book open. He was good at math. Numbers made sense in a way people didn't. They followed rules. They could be solved. He paused mid-problem and glanced toward the heater. The shirt hung still, limp and faded, like a ghost of something that once had color. He wondered if the other kids knew what it was like, not to want designer brands, not even to want to look cool, but just to want one clean, whole shirt. Just one that didn't make you feel like you had to disappear. He opened his notebook again, flipped to the back, and scribbled something small in the corner. "One day, I'll buy her a real house. With a porch that doesn't creak, and a washer that works. One day." Sleep came slowly that night. As the heater rattled and the wind howled faintly outside, Elijah lay on the old twin mattress that rested on the floor beside his mom. No frame. No headboard. Just a mattress and a dream. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. But sometimes, he wished the world would see more than just the shirt. Sometimes, he wished someone would ask why it was faded. The next morning, the chill hung heavier in the air, clinging to the ground like a quiet omen. Elijah's shirt was still a little damp when he pulled it off the heater, the fabric cold against his skin. He moved carefully, not to wake his mother, who'd had a rough night. Her coughing had come in waves that shook her fragile frame, but she'd insisted he sleep instead of worrying. Elijah didn't sleep much. He never really did. Not since the hospital bills started piling up and the cupboards began emptying faster than they filled. Not since he realized that, at 12 years old, he was becoming the man of the house. He slipped on his faded uniform shirt and tucked it into the same pair of khakis he'd worn 3 days this week. One knee was thinning, the stitching pulling at the seam. The belt loop on his right hip had snapped last month. No one noticed that part. But the shirt, they always noticed the shirt. By the time he got to school, the hallways were already crowded. His steps slowed as he passed Tyler's locker, but it didn't matter. They saw him anyway. "Look who showed up with the same crusty shirt again," Tyler snorted, loud enough for others to hear. "You got a whole closet full of those, or just one you love too much to let go." Elijah kept walking, jaw clenched. He could feel their eyes crawling over him like ants. He passed a group of girls who turned their heads and laughed behind their hands. A few whispered. He didn't catch what they said, but he didn't need to. He heard it all before. Inside the classroom, Elijah sat down quietly at his usual spot near the window, 2 seats from the back. No one ever sat beside him. Not unless assigned. His desk had small grooves where someone had once carved their initials with a pen. He traced them sometimes with his thumb when he wanted to feel less alone. Midway through first period, he reached into his backpack and pulled out his notebook, only to find that someone had drawn a big X across the front cover in permanent marker. He stared at it for a long second, lips pressed into a line. There were other scribbles too. "Smells like broke," one said. "Rag boy," said another. He said nothing. Just turned it over, opened a blank page in the back, and started taking notes. He said nothing. Just turned it over, opened a blank page in the back, and started taking notes. Miss Haynes noticed. She had that way of observing things without making a scene, like she knew how fragile dignity could be when it was all someone had left. During independent reading time, she slowly made her way over to Elijah's desk and knelt beside it. She kept her voice low. Elijah, would you like a fresh notebook? I have extras in my cabinet. Elijah, would you like a fresh notebook? I have extras in my cabinet. He shook his head quickly. It's okay. I can still use this one. Her eyes lingered on his for a moment longer. He didn't meet her gaze. Then she nodded and stood. Her eyes lingered on his for a moment longer. He didn't meet her gaze. Then she nodded and stood. It happened during lunch. He'd just made it through the cafeteria line with a small tray of spaghetti and a roll when Tyler stepped in front of him near the condiment station. The move was subtle, but fast. Tyler's elbow bumped Elijah's tray just enough to send red sauce spilling down the front of his shirt. It wasn't an accident. Everyone knew it. Oh man, Tyler said, laughing as Elijah froze. Now it's got a design. Maybe it'll cover up the stench. A roar of laughter followed. Elijah stood still, staring at the red stain soaking through the already discolored fabric. Then, without a word, he turned around and walked out of the cafeteria, tray still in hand. He didn't eat that day. Instead, he went into the boys' bathroom, locked himself in the last stall, and used thin paper towels to dab at the stain, pressing harder than he should have, until the fabric began to tear at the seam near the button. A roar of laughter followed. Elijah stood still, staring at the red stain soaking through the already discolored fabric. Then, without a word, he turned around and walked out of the cafeteria, tray still in hand. He didn't eat that day. Instead, he went into the boys' bathroom, locked himself in the last stall, and used thin paper towels to dab at the stain, pressing harder than he should have, until the fabric began to tear at the seam near the button. When the bell rang for fifth period, Elijah came out, wet spots still visible, and walked quietly back to class. When the bell rang for fifth period, Elijah came out, wet spots still visible, and walked quietly back to class. Maya saw him first. She was one of the few who never laughed. A quiet girl with dark blonde hair and a nervous smile, she always sat near Elijah in math. She didn't say much, but she'd once shared her eraser with him when his broke, and that memory stayed with him. Today, her eyes followed him with something different, concern, maybe even guilt. At the end of the day, she approached him at his locker. Hey, she said softly, keeping her voice low. I saw what happened. That wasn't right. Elijah looked at her, then quickly away. It's fine. Elijah looked at her, then quickly away. It's fine. It's not, she said, more firmly. You didn't deserve that. It's not, she said, more firmly. You didn't deserve that. He paused, then shrugged. People don't care. I do, Maya said, almost to herself. But he was already closing his locker. That night, Elijah didn't say much at home. He helped his mother with her breathing treatment, warmed up a can of beans for dinner, and laid out his shirt by the heater again, this time after gently washing the sauce out with cold water and dish soap. The red stain didn't fully lift. It lingered like a bruise on the fabric. He stared at it for a long while, then sighed and folded it as carefully as he could. Later, when his mother was asleep and the heater clanked softly in the corner, Elijah sat at the kitchen table, needle in hand, threading it through the tear near the seam. His fingers moved slowly, not from lack of skill, he'd taught himself to sew watching YouTube tutorials, but from tiredness. The fabric was thin now, almost translucent in places. He knew it wouldn't last forever. But he needed it to last just a little longer. His fingers paused, the needle suspended midair, and he looked up at the window. Outside, frost was beginning to form on the edge of the glass, like lace patterns dancing in the cold. He wondered, just for a moment, what it might feel like to walk into school in something new. Something warm. Something whole. But that kind of dream felt too big for someone like him. Back in her room, his mother coughed in her sleep. He stood up quietly, put the needle away, and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. "Almost there, Mama," he whispered. "I just need to hold out a little longer." He didn't cry. He didn't have the luxury of crying anymore. He had school tomorrow. And no matter what happened, he would wear that same shirt, clean and pressed as he could make it, with a spine straight as steel and a silence louder than any insult they could throw at him. Because Elijah had learned something most kids his age hadn't. He'd learned what it meant to endure, not just to survive, but to carry on without complaint, even when the world turned cold. And sometimes, the strongest people don't say a word. They just keep showing up. Miss Haynes had only been teaching at Roosevelt Middle School for a few weeks, but she already knew the signs. She could tell when a child was acting out for attention, and when a child was simply trying not to be seen. Elijah was the kind of student who tried to fold himself into the background, quiet, polite, never disruptive. But there was something about the way he flinched when his name was called, the way his eyes never quite met hers. And there was that shirt. Always the same one. Always clean, but worn in a way that spoke of necessity, not choice. It had started to bother her. Not in the way it bothered the other kids, who mocked and sneered from across the hallway. But in the way a gut instinct gnaws at the back of your mind, whispering that something isn't right. That Tuesday, after the incident in the cafeteria, she'd noticed the stain, faint, pinkish now, but unmistakable, and the way Elijah's hands trembled as he opened his textbook. She wanted to ask him what happened, but she knew better than to confront a child in front of his peers. Dignity matters. Especially when it's the last thing a person has to hold on to. Later that week, after school had let out and the hallways had emptied of their usual noise and motion, she found herself standing in front of the main office with her coat in one hand and a question she couldn't shake. She could have gone home. She had papers to grade, dinner to make, laundry to fold. But something about Elijah lingered with her, like a quiet ache. She turned and walked back toward the classroom. She checked the records first. His file didn't say much. Father deceased. Mother listed as unavailable for contact. Emergency number out of service. No disciplinary history. No participation in after-school programs. His address was listed as 842D South Maple, which she recognized as part of the older housing near the industrial area of town. She hesitated, then slipped the paper into her bag. That Saturday, she drove down South Maple just as the sun was beginning to lower behind the smokestacks. The homes on that block were more like shelters than houses, tiny, weathered structures patched with tar paper and salvaged wood. Some had plywood over the windows, and others leaned visibly to one side, like time had pushed them too far and no one had bothered to push back. She found 842D tucked between two larger lots. The paint had long since peeled from the siding, and a screen door hung crooked from its hinge. In front sat a rusted bicycle with one handlebar wrapped in duct tape. It was unmistakably Elijah's. She stood on the porch for a moment, unsure. Then she knocked, gently. The door opened slowly. A woman appeared, thin, pale, her hair pulled back under a scarf. Her eyes were sunken but kind. She looked like someone who had known better days and had carried worse nights on her shoulders. "Hi," Miss Haynes said, her voice soft. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Elijah's teacher." The woman's face lit up slightly, a trace of pride flickering in her expression. "You must be Miss Haynes. Elijah talks about you sometimes. Says you're one of the nice ones." Miss Haynes smiled, humbled. "I hope so. I wanted to check in. I've noticed Elijah's had a tough time lately." The woman, Camille, she introduced herself, stepped back and motioned for her to come in. The living room was small and clean, though sparsely furnished. A single couch, threadbare at the arms. A folding table in the corner with two mismatched chairs. There was a heater in the wall, its vent rattling softly, and a small television that looked at least 20 years old. On the coffee table sat a row of prescription bottles, some nearly empty. "I'd offer you coffee," Camille said, "but we're running low on just about everything these days." Miss Haynes shook her head. Please, don't worry. I didn't come to trouble you. Camille sat down carefully, as if her bones ached in places no doctor could fix. Elijah's a good boy. Always has been. Too good, if you ask me. He never complains. Never asks for anything. Just helps me get through the days. Miss Haynes looked around the room, her heart tightening. He's been wearing the same shirt for quite a while now. I thought I should ask if there's anything the school can do to help. Camille gave a tired smile. That shirt? He washes it every night. Won't let me touch it. Says it's his job now. His daddy used to wear button-downs like that when he was still working. Elijah says it makes him feel grown. Miss Haynes nodded, fighting the lump rising in her throat. Camille looked toward the small window above the kitchen sink. We lost Marcus last year. Construction accident. The company blamed him. No payout. Just a funeral we couldn't afford. She paused, swallowing hard. After that, everything got harder. I got sick not long after. Can't work much with lungs like these. Elijah took it all on his shoulders. Too much for a boy that age. There was a silence between them, not heavy, but full. Miss Haynes glanced toward the bedroom door, slightly ajar. Does he have everything he needs for school? Camille laughed softly, a bitter edge in her voice. No, but he never says a word. He comes home, studies, helps with my meds, makes dinner. Sometimes I think he's the one raising me. It was more than Miss Haynes had expected. More than she'd wanted to know, in some ways. But necessary. Her instincts had been right. Elijah wasn't just another quiet student. He was a child carrying the weight of an adult world on his narrow back, walking through the same school halls as kids who mocked him for wearing the only shirt he owned. When she finally stood to leave, Camille walked her to the door. Thank you for caring, she said. Not everyone does. I'll keep an eye on him, Miss Haynes promised. And if there's anything I can do, anything at all. Camille nodded, her eyes glassy. Just don't make him feel different. He tries so hard to be normal. Back in her car, Miss Haynes sat for a long time before turning the key. The heater blew cold air for the first few seconds, and she rubbed her hands together. She thought about her students. The ones with shiny sneakers and smartphones. The ones who complained when the Wi-Fi cut out. And then she thought about Elijah, stitching his shirt in the dark, caring for his mother without complaint, doing his homework at a folding table in a two-room house with no working stove. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. That night, she pulled out a journal she hadn't touched since college and wrote until her hand ached. She wrote about the difference between poverty and resilience. About what it meant to teach, not just subjects, but souls. And about a boy named Elijah who reminded her why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Elsewhere, Maya was lying awake in her own room across town. She'd overheard Tyler laughing again that day, and for the first time, the sound made her stomach turn. She remembered the look on Elijah's face, the way he'd stared at the floor when the cafeteria sauce had splattered across his shirt. And she decided something quietly, in the way only kids who mean it do. She was going to do something about it. What? She wasn't sure yet. But she wouldn't be silent anymore. Because some kids carry books. Others carry burdens. And sometimes, the difference between cruelty and compassion is who's paying attention. The week of the school assembly came with the first signs of November in the air. The wind was colder now, the leaves along the sidewalk turning brittle beneath Elijah's sneakers as he made his way to school. He still wore the same shirt, of course. The one he carefully washed and pressed every night with dish soap and warm water. The one with the faded collar, the frayed cuffs, the light pink stain near the hem that wouldn't come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. He'd gotten used to the way it felt against his skin. It wasn't comfort, but it was familiar. And in his world, familiarity meant stability. Roosevelt Middle School was buzzing with energy that week. The upcoming assembly was a tradition, a showcase of student voices, talents, and dreams. This year, the theme was my vision for the future. Every homeroom was encouraged to have at least one student speak. Maya had volunteered right away. Tyler had too, of course. He made a whole show of it, announcing that he'd be sharing his vision for world domination and getting a wave of laughter from his crew. But Miss Haynes, perhaps sensing something, had gently suggested Elijah submit something too. "You've got something important to say," she told him one afternoon as he stayed behind to help her stack books. "I'm not good at speaking," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest." He didn't answer right away. But that night, he sat at the folding table in his living room, next to his mother's medication tray, and began writing. At first, the words came slow, awkward. Then they flowed. He didn't write about wanting a fancy job or a big house. He didn't write about cars or travel or becoming famous. He wrote about wanting to feel safe. About wanting his mother to get better. About wanting to stop hiding behind worn fabric and tired eyes. He wrote the truth. And somehow, that felt like enough. Miss Haynes submitted his name for the assembly. Elijah didn't protest. He didn't expect much, but a quiet voice in the back of his mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time someone heard him. When the day finally arrived, the entire student body filed into the gymnasium, shuffling across the hardwood floors in their sneakers and boots, jackets tied around waists or slung over chairs. The teachers sat in folding chairs along the edges, and Principal Rollins gave his usual welcome speech that half the kids tuned out. One by one, students took the mic. Some spoke about becoming doctors. Others talked about saving the planet, or running businesses, or joining the NBA. Maya spoke too. Her voice shook a little, but she talked about her dream of starting a shelter for abandoned animals. She smiled at Elijah when she returned to her seat. He gave her a small nod. Then Tyler took the stage. He swaggered up, confident, loud, cracking jokes about building the world's largest gaming company and having his own brand of potato chips. The crowd laughed, clapped. He was a showman, always had been. But for Elijah, it was background noise. His turn was next. He could feel his heart pounding long before his name was called. Not just in his chest, but in his throat, and his fingertips. His palms were sweating, and he rubbed them against his khakis. He felt the familiar tightness in his stomach, the one that came every time he had to walk into the cafeteria or answer a question aloud. But this was worse. This was everyone. He could see Tyler smirking in the front row, already whispering something to the kid beside him. "Elijah Thomas," the principal announced, his voice echoing through the gym. The room grew quiet. Some students blinked in surprise. Elijah? The kid with the same shirt every day? The one who never raised his hand? Elijah stood slowly. He walked to the front, gripping the folded page in his hand like it might disappear if he let go. The microphone stood slightly too high for him, and he adjusted it carefully, his fingers trembling. He looked up. The sea of faces stared back, some bored, some curious, a few smirking. He saw Maya near the front, giving him a quiet, encouraging look. He saw Miss Haynes beside the other teachers, her eyes calm and full of something he hadn't felt in a long time, faith. He took a breath. Then another. And he began. "My name is Elijah. And I don't really have a big vision for the future. Not like some people do. I'm not trying to be rich. I don't want to be on TV. I just want my mom to get better." The room was still. You could have heard the creak of a bleacher seat or the hum of the old gym lights overhead. "She's sick. Real sick. Some nights she can't breathe unless I help her sit up. I cook dinner. I wash my own clothes. I walk my bike to school sometimes when the chain breaks because we can't afford to fix it. That's why I wear the same shirt every day. I wash it every night in the bathroom sink. I hang it near the heater so it'll dry by morning. I'm not dirty. I just don't have anything else." He paused, swallowing. No one laughed. Not even Tyler. I know people make fun of me. They say I smell. They say I'm poor. And they're right. I am. But I'm still a person. And I still have dreams. I dream that one day, my mom won't need medicine she can't afford. I dream of a house with a real washer and dryer. I dream of walking into school and not feeling ashamed. His voice broke a little then, just for a second. But he didn't stop. I'm not asking for anyone to feel sorry for me. I just want people to understand that sometimes what you see isn't the whole story. He stepped back from the mic. His hands were shaking. He didn't wait for applause. He walked straight back to his seat, head down. But the room didn't stay silent for long. It started with Maya. She clapped. Then Miss Haynes. Then others. Soon, the entire gym erupted in a standing ovation, not loud and wild, but steady, strong, honest. A sound that wrapped around Elijah like something warm. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Tyler didn't clap at first. He sat frozen, face unreadable. Then, slowly, he lowered his head. He didn't say anything. But something shifted in him too. Elijah sat down, staring at the floor, stunned. Not because he'd spoken, but because people had listened. After the assembly, a few kids approached him, awkwardly, unsure. One gave him a fist bump. Another said, "Hey man, that was brave." He nodded, still dazed. That afternoon, Miss Haynes caught him at his locker. She didn't say much. Just placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did something powerful today." And he believed her. Because in a room full of voices, Elijah's truth had stood tallest. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. The day after the assembly, something was different. Not just in the way the students looked at Elijah, though that had changed too, but in the quiet way the school itself seemed to breathe differently. The hallways, once filled with snickers and turned backs, now held an unfamiliar quiet respect. Some kids nodded at him as he walked past. Others didn't say a word, but their eyes held something softer than before, something closer to understanding. Maya was waiting near his locker that morning, a small smile on her face and a paper bag in her hands. "I brought you something," she said. He looked at her, unsure. "It's just a sandwich. And some cookies. My mom makes extras sometimes." Elijah hesitated, then accepted it. "Thanks," he said quietly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't bring up the assembly. She just walked with him to class, and that was enough. Miss Haynes had been watching closely, but she never made a show of it. Her words to Elijah after the assembly had been brief, but they'd stayed with him all night. "You did something powerful." He didn't quite know what that meant. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like his story had a place in the world. That he had a place. That Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang, Miss Haynes asked Elijah to stay behind. He gathered his things, wondering if he'd forgotten an assignment. When the classroom had emptied, she handed him an envelope. "Open it at home," she said gently. "And tell your mom I said hello." The walk home felt longer that day, though he couldn't explain why. The air had a quiet stillness to it, and the sky was starting to fade into that soft, gold color that only came in autumn, right before dusk settled in like a hush. Elijah rode his bike slowly, the chain still skipping every few pedals, but he didn't mind. He wasn't in a rush. For the first time in a while, it felt like the world wasn't chasing him. At home, his mother was resting on the couch, her blanket pulled up to her chin, her breathing shallow but steady. Elijah placed the envelope on the table, then made her some soup, thin broth with a few noodles, but warm, and that mattered. After dinner, as she dozed off, he finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. And a gift card. He stared at them for a long moment before picking up the letter. "Elijah," it read in Miss Haynes' careful script, "there are people in this world who see your heart. I want you to know that your words at the assembly changed something in this school. In me. This gift card was donated anonymously, just a small gesture to remind you that you are not alone. You are seen. You are valued. And you are deeply respected. Use it however you'd like. No strings. Just care. Elijah stared at the gift card, $100, to a local department store. His hands trembled slightly as he held it. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the letter. It was the fact that someone, somewhere, had listened. Had cared. Had acted. The next day, he and his mom walked to the store together. It wasn't far, just 3 blocks from the bus stop. His mom moved slow, her breath shallow, but she insisted on coming. First new shirt in how long, she teased gently, her hand resting on his shoulder as they stood outside the automatic doors. 6th grade, he said with a shy smile. Too long. Inside, Elijah wandered through the boys section, fingers brushing over racks of folded shirts, stacks of denim jeans, rows of clean sneakers. It felt strange. Like being somewhere he didn't quite belong. But not in a bad way. Just unfamiliar. He found a button-down, a soft blue, with crisp cuffs and a collar that still held its shape. He held it up to his frame, uncertain. "You'd look handsome in that," his mother said, her voice tired but proud. "Just like your daddy used to." They left the store with 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, and socks, real, thick socks, not the thin ones he'd been wearing for weeks. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and gentle eyes, bagged their items without comment. But as Elijah turned to leave, she said quietly, "You keep being brave, young man. The world needs more of that." That night, Elijah laid his new clothes out on the back of the couch. He didn't want to fold them yet. He just wanted to look at them. For a moment, he wondered what it would feel like to wear them on Monday. To walk into school with a shirt that hadn't known tears, hadn't absorbed fear, hadn't been his armor every day. And then he wondered if it even mattered. Because something had changed. Not in the fabric of his shirt, but in him. On Monday morning, Elijah wore the blue button-down. He buttoned it slowly, careful not to crease it. It fit just right, no tug at the shoulders, no sleeves too short. As he left the house, his mother smiled from the couch. "Look at you," she said softly. "My Elijah." The walk to school was quiet, but not heavy. When he stepped into the hallway, a few kids turned to look. Not in mockery this time, but in surprise. Recognition. Maybe even admiration. Tyler was at his locker, same as always. He looked up when Elijah passed. Their eyes met. For a long second, neither said a word. Then Tyler did something Elijah didn't expect. He stepped forward, reached into his backpack, and handed Elijah a brand new binder. It was black, sturdy, still in the packaging. "I had an extra," he said quickly, almost defensively. "Figured you could use it." Elijah nodded. "Thanks." Tyler didn't smile. Didn't wait for a thank you. He just turned back to his locker like nothing had happened. But something had. In homeroom, Miss Haynes stood beside her desk with a small announcement. The school, she said, would be launching a new program, an initiative to support students who faced hardships, quietly and with dignity. It would offer supplies, clothes, and help, no questions asked. "We're calling it the Elijah Hope Program," she said, her voice clear, unwavering. Because sometimes, the smallest voice can inspire the biggest change. Elijah didn't move. He didn't know what to say. But the room around him erupted in applause, soft, steady, sincere. After school, Maya found him near the bike rack. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "I just told the truth." She smiled. Sometimes that's the bravest thing anyone can do. That night, Elijah returned home, placed the new shirt gently on a hanger, and sat beside his mother as she watched an old black and white movie on TV. She didn't talk much. Neither did he. But the silence between them was full of something good. Something whole. For the first time in a long time, Elijah didn't feel like he had to disappear. He didn't feel like a stain on a shirt or a burden in the back of the room. He felt seen, heard, respected. And the truth of it was simple. You can wear a brand new shirt and still feel empty. Or you can wear the same one every day, stitched and stained, and still carry dignity in your spine and kindness in your voice. But when the world finally decides to look beyond the fabric and see the heart underneath, that's when healing begins. And Elijah, he was living proof.